Good evening, friends. The operational situation at the front, and important news by the end of the 5th of February. We will start with you from the Lyman direction of AVDEEVKA, along the front. It means that active military operations continue on this sector of the front. In my telegram, I published messages directly from the fighters from the field. They reported, well, actually the truth, which is that the situation is actually very difficult. The enemy has a significant advantage in artillery, which he naturally uses now. They use the whole range of weapons, meaning tactical aviation, striking. As far as possible, the armed forces of Ukraine hold the defense and do everything that is possible and impossible from them on this sector of the front. But we need to understand what we were talking about even before the advances along the Laptiv Yar and the approach close to the neighbor's Yar, that the enemy is concentrating forces on this sector of the front, and, accordingly, it is transferring Kremennaya, Chervona Popovka, and Krasnorochenskaya armored vehicles. That is, there is a section of the front that is saturated with equipment today, and the enemy is pulling it up. Naturally, the AFU is also working on reconnaissance, aerial reconnaissance and detection of equipment, and strikes on rear positions. But, still, we are talking more about the front now, and the enemy continues to pressure. This means that we have active hostilities not only along the Yarov, but also in the Krugaya Beam itself. That is, Russian troops are taking further offensive actions, and not in so many directions to the west, if we are talking for Krugaya Beam, but in the northwest. That is, an attempt to advance to the maximum landing, to cling to it, since immutability is not the best place to be. This is understandable. Well, the main goal of the enemy now on this section of the front is a gray zone, pass it, and knock out a number of positions in the center. It is possible to restrain Russian troops and prevent a breakthrough, but the situation is quite complicated, let's be blunt. Plus, do not forget here, we have already focused on the supply, it is quite complex. Taking into account what kind of aerial reconnaissance is now, its level, and actually, that the AFU rear is a cascade of stakes, and not settlements or fields, roads. That is, a very difficult area for conducting military operations. We do not record any new changes. The main fighting continues within the gray zone. We are moving to the Bakhmut direction of AVDEEVKA. So, today, the footage was published by the AFU fighters of the enemy's fire defeat at the T-shaped intersection. Before, we added a gray zone, where the soldiers of the 93rd Brigade knocked out the Russian troops. This is approximately in the center of the gray zone. We were knocked out from one of the positions. Or rather than we reached the center from two positions, but today, we see that again the enemy is present at the extreme position at the T-shaped intersection. Therefore, a clarification of the red zone and the gray zone in this area has been added. Activity is quite high, as we can see. But, we are talking about changes, or rather even clarifications. If we talk in general about the direction, now there is activity between AVDEEVKA and Grigorovka. According to drone footage, according to the geolinking of drone footage, this is about this area. It cannot be said that this is Grigorovka, because there is a message that Russian troops may try to advance along the forest belt to Grigorovka, then land at the canal itself, try to advance, take more advantageous positions, use the canal as a border. That is, the probability of a flank strike decreases. But, this is one moment. Another thing is that they can simply try to bypass the very landing north of AVDEEVKA, on which they had a bet. And we have said that they were not going to take a frontal assault on AVDEEVKA, but wanted to put pincers around it, and then hit the very, so to speak, southwestern part of the settlement. Here is such a moment. Therefore, we do not record any other changes, but the enemy's activity does increase periodically. These are not the massive attacks that were, but still small infantry groups. We will talk about this again, when there is a conversation for AVDEEVKA. As for Ivanovskaya Kleshivka of this section of the front. So, you may have seen the last shots, who is interested in the front. There was activity of Russian troops at the railway north of Kleshivka, there was activity of Russian troops in the direction of AVDEEVKA, which means that they show it as much as possible in small infantry groups, attacking with the widest possible coverage. That is, again twisting our artillery, trying to find that very slack in the defense, find a gap, and try to advance again. To date, we do not record any changes, but the activity of these small infantry groups, it is quite serious for us in the Bakhmut direction from the enemy. We are moving to the AVDEEVKA direction, and here, I will comment on one of the Western news. We also had media resources reporting it today, which means why now Russian troops periodically have such advances. But, these are thoughts from the West, let's say. It's not ours, but theirs. So, because they operate just the same small infantry groups, sometimes this assault group can consist of only 3 people. They are the widest possible coverage, what we are talking about. And of course, it is impractical to spend artillery on 2 or 3 people, bearing in mind its price of an artillery shell, well, compared to an F-drone. Naturally, the artillery is working further, it can cause more serious damage, but, again, if it is a small infantry group, it has become impractical, so these small infantry groups come close where they are already united to the forward positions. And accordingly, more serious assault actions are carried out. But this is a view from the West, it has a place to be. The only thing is, yes, we have a shortage of ammunition, so this partially corresponds to reality. There would have been more, of course they would have stopped. As for the northern flank, Novobakhmutovka is a typical area without any new positional changes in the fighting along AVDEEVKA, the northern flank of northern AVDEEVKA itself, and northeast of AVDEEVKA. It means that there was an official statement from the military administration of AVDEEVKA that reports of urban battles do not correspond to reality. That the Russian troops were only able to enter the territory of the Garden Association. Well, in general, this is the second statement after the Tsar's-Hunt complex, but there was a nuance. When they said that the Tsarskaya Okhota complex was under the AFU, the next day, the Russian troops published footage of where they were there. So they refuted the statement. So, it is clear that you need to cheer, but again, not exactly the same work is going on. We already had work on Bakhmut, when there were reports that the convicts were mobs, and we didn't have Bakhmut as a result. You can talk about it a lot. Now the situation is similar. The Russian troops, we have a lot of talk about the fact that they are not succeeding. But guys, we need to work in a different way. It is clear that the situation is difficult, we need to encourage, and the fighters themselves report the situation. Somewhere they manage to counterattack, and even throw back Russian troops, but again they do not step on the same rake, because again, we are too relaxed about what is going on, to put it bluntly. Because, there are a lot of statements on the air, that the people are relaxed. But why are people relaxed? Because, those who speak at the inferi, from the Verkhovna Rada, what are they doing? That's right, they vote for telethons and so on, saying that again Russia does not know how to fight. They have 2 or 3 more exits left of forces, reserves, and they will run out. It won't be like that, but this is my opinion, let's say so, because according to the situation, they are pressing not only in the direction of the north of AVDEEVKA, another section, this is to the south of the treatment facilities, what we talked about the day before yesterday, or rather yesterday, and it unfortunately was confirmed that they attacked to the south. We painted over the red zone. Today, we are talking about the fact that the vector of their attacks is not only the AVDEEVKA itself in the south direction, but in the southwest, that is, the neighboring Garden Partnership. If they are specifically interested in basements where you can catch on, gain a foothold, as it was in the Tochmash Garden Partnership, which we have northeast of the model is located. Therefore, now the situation is similar, the enemy is trying to use the basements. We have had a similar situation since Vesely, when the Ivushka II, or rather the Garden Partnership, attacked, and due to these basements, then the enemy having superiority in personnel and artillery ammunition for tactical aviation and armored tanks, was naturally able to develop further progress. Therefore, it is necessary to take all necessary measures to prevent this. This primarily depends on drones, on remote mining, on the Ministry of Production, and so on and so on. And I would even say not so much, given the type of fighting here, not so much from long-range artillery, as from the same mortars. It is also necessary to place a bet on them. Yes, their production is increasing, but these processes, roughly speaking, this month, there will be 2 years of war, and January, February, the 23rd month and the 24th, to declare that we are now increasing it, is very, very late in my opinion, because we are now coming to the fact that which should have been back in the 22nd year. But this is my opinion. There is such a moment. There are also a number of reports that they are pressing into the sand pit in the south direction from Wiesli, along the forest belts, which means that they are trying to gain a foothold at the quarry itself by the road approximately in this area. There is, yes, really pressure from the enemy, because again, the forest belts are used precisely in order to move south. In addition to all this, the weather conditions are also not the best. We have a strong wind, as you have seen. This affects, because the advance north of AVDEEVKA, it was just the same associated with fog. There is such a thing. Therefore, we have a similar situation with this sector of the front today. Complicated. Complicated, I would say. As for the south, this means that the dynamic situation remains in the south. Periodically it is possible to knock out the enemy somewhere and enter these zones. Somewhere the enemy advances in the gray zone, but again loses positions with varying success. Dynamic environment. And similarly, there are fights in the area of the Tsarskaya Okhota complex. In other words, here, we do not record the advance of Russian troops. Therefore, now they are making a very, very big bet on the north of AVDEEVKA, what we talked about, attacking not only along the south of the Ivushka Garden Association itself, but also from the sewage treatment plants in the southwest direction, in order to maximize coverage, and of course have further success in offensive actions, involving the maximum number of assault groups, which in my opinion is infantry. Plus, do not forget that there is information about the transfer of enemy reserves to this section of the front. In other words, AVDEEVKA is the #1 goal for them now, and obviously February will be the #1 goal, based on all the information that we have today. Moving on, I will comment on Prvomaiskaya and Georgievka. May-Day fighting is still in the area of Pershutravneva Street. So, well, let's talk about this area roughly. The enemy is also using a fairly large amount of artillery here, and at the same time, tactical aviation, aerial bombs on this sector of the front. Well, today also our fighters in the AVDEEVKA direction recorded information, and how they, to put it mildly, yes, something heavy arrives all the time, as they report. But this means aerial bombs. This, of course, complicates the defense, complicates counterattacks, because the enemy has involved quite a large number of tactical aircraft. Therefore, the assault operations in the AVDEEVKA direction as a whole continue, both to the south, north of AVDEEVKA itself, and the western flank, Prvomaiskaya, well, attempts in our area of Opitny continue, but do not have a positional character. As for Georgievka, it means, based on the information that is available, some force is concentrated in Donetsk itself, in the western part of Donetsk, of Russian troops, which will most likely be sent to assault operations again. Whether it will be supported by armored vehicles, as it was before, or not, is unknown. But the concentration of these forces in the western part, that is, pulling up, transferring reserves directly to the first line, says first of all, that Russian troops intend to carry out further assault operations on this sector of the front. Therefore, this also remains a fairly hot spot for us. Yes, it is possible to repel a large number of attacks, because the information of the General Staff mentions this direction a lot. Russian troops are really making a lot of attempts in the direction of victory. It is also in the direction of forest belts, abandoned field reservoirs, but it is possible to repel most of these attacks, if not all of them, to date according to the outcome. Therefore, we do not fix any changes. In the South Donetsk, Veliko Novoselkovsky, Orekhovsky, and Kherson directions without any changes. The only thing I will add is that Moses, the operator, the enemy drone operator, turned out to be alive, despite the fact that there were statements that the Magyar operators were able to eliminate him. There was a flight of one of the drones into the garage room in the house, the first floor, where there was a group of Moses, but he survived. There is such a moment, so it says that it is impossible to relax in any case. Because the enemy has quite experienced drone operators who can train more operators later, telling them, passing on knowledge and some features. And this is very, very important.